The crimson sun cast harsh shadows across the dusty yard as Clara Porter wiped sweat from her brow, her calloused hands trembling with exhaustion. Dawn had broken over Sonora, California, 6 hours ago, yet the day stretched before her like an endless desert with no water in sight. She had 12 more hours of backbreaking labor before she could collapse onto her thin straw mattress in the cramped servants' quarters. It was 1876, and Clara had been trapped in indentured servitude at the Blackwater Mining Company's quarters for nearly 2 years now. At 22, her once vibrant spirit had been worn down like leather exposed too long to the elements. The contract her desperate father had signed before his death, promising 5 years of her labor to settle his gambling debts, seemed like a prison sentence without possibility of parole. Porter. "Those sheets won't hang themselves." Mrs. Garner's sharp voice cut through the morning air. The stern-faced housekeeper supervised all the indentured workers with an iron fist and a tongue sharper than a rattlesnake's bite. "Yes, madam," Clara replied, reaching into the basket for another damp sheet. Her fingers, cracked and raw from lye soap, stung as she pinned the heavy cotton to the line. The mining company's compound bustled with activity. Men headed to the mines while the women attended to cooking, cleaning, and laundry. Some were paid workers, but many, like Clara, were bound by contracts working to pay off debts with interest that seemed to multiply faster than desert rabbits. She glanced at the road leading into town, allowing herself a moment's fantasy of walking away. But Clara knew what happened to runners. Bounty hunters brought them back, and their contracts were extended. Some were even sold to less reputable establishments. At least here, despite the grueling work, she had a roof and regular meals. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Clara's shoulders ached from scrubbing mining executives' shirts against the washboard. Her thoughts drifted to her childhood home in Illinois, to her mother's garden of wildflowers, to a life that now seemed like a distant dream. "Riders coming," someone called out. Clara didn't bother looking up. Visitors to the compound were common, mostly businessmen, sometimes lawmen, occasionally troublemakers. None of them mattered to someone in her position. The thundering hoofbeats grew closer, then slowed to a stop. Clara kept her head down, focusing on her work as voices drifted across the yard. "Mr. Daniels, welcome back to Sonora," called out Mr. Sutton, the company manager. "We weren't expecting you for another month." Clara's curiosity got the better of her. She glanced up through strands of auburn hair that had escaped her simple bun. 3 riders had arrived, but only one commanded her attention. He sat tall on a magnificent chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders wrapped in a dusty duster coat, a well-worn Stetson casting shadows across his face. When he dismounted, he moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. "Change of plans, Sutton," the man replied, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. "Cattle drive finished early, and I've got business to attend to." Clara couldn't help but stare. This wasn't the typical mine owner or businessman who visited. Everything about him spoke of the open range from his worn boots to the revolver holstered at his hip. "That's Vincent Daniels," whispered Betsy, another indentured woman working the laundry nearby. "Owns the Sunset Ranch south of here. They say he started with nothing but built one of the biggest cattle operations in the territory." Clara had heard the name before. Ranchers and miners often had a contentious relationship, competing for land and resources. Yet Vincent Daniels seemed to navigate both worlds with ease. "Back to work," Mrs. Garner snapped, noticing their distraction. Clara ducked her head and resumed scrubbing, but couldn't help stealing glances as Vincent Daniels and his men followed Mr. Sutton into the main office building. The day dragged on relentlessly. By evening, Clara's fingers were bleeding from mending torn mining uniforms. Her stomach growled the workers wouldn't eat until after serving dinner to the executives and their guests. When she entered the dining hall with a pitcher of water, she was surprised to see Vincent Daniels seated among the mining company officials. His rugged appearance contrasted sharply with their polished suits and slicked-back hair. "The cattle market in San Francisco is booming," one executive was saying, "but it's the labor market that's causing problems. Good help is increasingly hard to find. Clara moved silently around the table, refilling glasses without being noticed, a skill she had perfected. That's why contract workers are the future, Sutton replied. Fixed costs, no complaints. Vincent Daniels frowned slightly. I prefer to pay a fair wage for honest work. Builds loyalty. Loyalty is expensive, Sutton laughed, and unnecessary when you have legally binding contracts. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she poured water into Daniel's glass, and a few drops splashed onto the tablecloth. I apologize, sir, she murmured, quickly dabbing at the spill. For the first time, Vincent Daniels really looked at her, not through her, as most did, but at her. His eyes were a startling blue, like the sky after a summer storm. No harm done, he said quietly. Clara felt her cheeks flush as she moved away. Something about his gaze had seemed to see beyond her threadbare dress and exhausted appearance. Later that night, after the executives had retired and the workers had eaten their meager meal, Clara was assigned to clean the meeting room. Her body ached with fatigue, but 17 hours into her workday, she had no choice but to continue. As she swept the floor, the door opened. Clara froze, her heart racing with fear that someone had found fault with her work. Vincent Daniels stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the lamplight from the hallway. Pardon me, he said. I left my ledger. Clara nodded and stepped aside as he crossed to the table, retrieving a leather-bound book. Instead of leaving immediately, he paused, studying her. You've been working since before dawn, haven't you? Surprised by the direct question, Clara hesitated before answering. Yes, sir. And you'll be working until midnight? Until the tasks are complete, sir. Vincent's jaw tightened. What's your name? Clara Porter, sir. You're under contract, Clara nodded, eyes downcast. 3 more years, sir. Vincent was quiet for a moment. That seems like a long time for someone so young. It was 5 years originally, for my father's debts. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. Get some rest when you can, Miss Porter, he said finally, then turned and left. Clara stared after him, confused by the brief interaction. No one had spoken to her like a person, not just a worker, in a very long time. The next morning arrived too soon. Clara's muscles protested as she rose before dawn to light the kitchen fires. As she trudged across the yard with an armful of kindling, she noticed unusual activity around the main office. Several horses were saddled outside, including Vincent Daniels' chestnut stallion. Throughout the morning, Clara caught glimpses of men coming and going from the office. Their voices occasionally rose loud enough to hear fragments, something about contracts and payments. By midday, Mrs. Garner was in a foul mood, barking orders more harshly than usual. Porter, you're wanted in the main office. Make yourself presentable. Clara's stomach knotted with anxiety. Being summoned to the office never boded well. Had she done something wrong? Perhaps spilling water on the tablecloth had been reported after all. She quickly washed her face and hands, smoothed her hair, and straightened her apron before making her way to the office. Her heart pounded like a blacksmith's hammer as she knocked on the heavy wooden door. Enter, called Sutton's voice. Clara stepped inside, keeping her eyes lowered respectfully. The room smelled of cigar smoke and leather. Through her downcast eyes, she could see several pairs of boots, Sutton's polished shoes, another executive's fancy boots, and the worn, dusty boots she recognized as belonging to Vincent Daniels. Miss Porter, Sutton began, his tone unusually formal, it appears there has been a change regarding your contract. Clara's head snapped up, fear coursing through her veins. Changes to contracts were rarely good news. Would she be transferred somewhere worse? Had her term been extended? Mr. Daniels has purchased your contract from the Blackwater Mining Company, Sutton continued, clearly displeased. Clara's gaze darted to Vincent, who stood with his arms crossed, expression unreadable beneath his hat. I don't understand, she whispered. Vincent stepped forward, holding out a folded document. Your contract, Miss Porter, it's yours now. With trembling fingers, Clara took the paper, unfolding it to see her father's signature, the company's seal, and across the front a bold stamp. Paid in full. What does this mean? She asked, scarcely daring to hope. It means, Vincent said firmly, that you're free to do as you please. Your debt is settled. Clara stared at the document, unable to process his words. Free. After 2 years of servitude, with the prospect of 3 more stretching before her, freedom seemed an impossible dream. But she began, looking between the men in confusion. Mr. Daniels has some misguided notions about labor practices, Sutton said with poorly disguised contempt. He's paid a considerable sum to release you from your obligations. Why? Clara asked, looking directly at Vincent. His blue eyes met hers steadily. No one should work from dawn until midnight without choice or fair compensation. That's not employment, it's exploitation. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to show weakness in front of Sutton. Your personal belongings are being collected, Sutton informed her coldly. You'll vacate company property immediately. I understand, Clara replied, clutching the contract to her chest like a shield. Vincent nodded toward the door. My men will escort you to gather your things. Outside, reality began to sink in. Clara followed one of Vincent's ranch hands to the women's quarters, where her few possessions, a worn dress, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, a small Bible, and a faded photograph, were quickly packed into a satchel. Several of the other women watched in astonishment. Betsy approached, her eyes wide. Is it true? She whispered. He bought your contract, Clara nodded, still dazed. He's torn it up, I'm free. Betsy squeezed her hand. You're the lucky one, make something of it, Mrs. Garner appeared in the doorway, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. Time to go, Porter. Your replacement has already been assigned your duties. Outside, Vincent Daniels waited beside his horse, speaking quietly with his men. When he saw Clara, he approached, his expression softening slightly. Do you have family nearby, Miss Porter? Somewhere I can take you? Clara shook her head. No, sir, no family left. I was planning to stay in Sonora, find work if possible. Vincent considered this. It won't be easy. Sutton has influence in town. He might make things difficult for you. Clara hadn't thought of that. Her moment of elation faltered as reality set in. She was free, but free to do what? With no money, no connections, and potentially a powerful enemy, her options were severely limited. I understand if you can't help further, she said, squaring her shoulders. You've already done more than I could ever repay. Vincent studied her for a moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. I have a proposition, Miss Porter. My ranch is short-handed, especially with the house staff. I can offer you a position, fair wages, reasonable hours, and a small cabin to yourself. Clara hesitated, suspicion flickering through her mind. Why would this man first buy her freedom, then offer her employment? She'd heard stories of men who rescued indentured women only to exploit them in different ways. Vincent seemed to read her thoughts. You'll have a signed contract, a real one with fair terms. You can leave any time you choose, and you'll be working for my housekeeper, Mrs. Hollister, not directly for me. Why are you doing this? Clara asked. Unable to keep the question inside any longer, Vincent's expression darkened. Let's just say I've seen what happens in places like this before. Sometimes a person needs a fighting chance. He paused, then added more gently, You don't have to decide now. I can take you to town, help you find lodging until you sort things out. Clara looked back at the mining company compound, at the drab buildings that had been her prison for 2 years. Then she looked at Vincent Daniels, a stranger who had given her freedom without asking anything in return. I accept your offer of employment, Mr. Daniels, she said firmly, as long as I'm free to leave if I choose. A smile briefly crossed his face. That's the point of freedom, Miss Porter. The choice is always yours. He mounted his horse, then extended his hand down to her. Sunset Ranch is a half-day's ride south. Can you ride? Not since I was a girl, Clara admitted. You'll ride with me then. We'll go slow. With a deep breath, Clara took his hand and allowed herself to be pulled up behind him. The sensation of sitting on a horse was foreign after so long, as was the awkward awareness of having to hold onto a man's waist to stay balanced. Ready? Vincent asked over his shoulder. Clara took one last look at the compound, at the women still hanging laundry under Mrs. Garner's watchful eye, at the place where she had lost 2 years of her life. Yes, she said with quiet determination. I'm ready. As they rode away, Clara kept expecting to wake up, to find herself back in the servants' quarters, preparing for another day of endless labor. but the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her and the solid presence of Vincent Daniels in front of her assured her this was real. They rode in silence for some time, Clara absorbing the sensation of freedom, of the open landscape stretching around them. The hills surrounding Sonora were golden with summer grass, dotted with oak trees and pines. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada mountains rose majestically against the sky. "Are you comfortable?" Vincent asked eventually, breaking the silence. "Yes, thank you," Clara replied, though in truth her legs were growing stiff from the unaccustomed posture. She had been too embarrassed to hold tightly to his waist at first, but as the horse navigated a steep section of trail, she had little choice but to grasp more firmly. "We'll stop soon to rest the horses," he assured her. True to his word, they halted an hour later by a small stream. Vincent's two ranch hands, whom he introduced as Tom and Ali, efficiently set about caring for the horses while Vincent helped Clara dismount. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her when her feet touched the ground. "Easy now," Vincent said, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "Riding takes different muscles than walking." Clara nodded gratefully, trying to massage feeling back into her thighs without appearing unladylike. She made her way to a flat rock by the stream and sat down, watching as Vincent conferred with his men. In the daylight, away from the oppressive atmosphere of the mining company, she had a chance to really look at him. Vincent Daniels appeared to be in his early 30s, with a strong jawline often hidden by several days' growth of beard. His dark hair had a slight wave to it, and lines at the corners of his eyes suggested he smiled more often than she had yet witnessed. There was a quiet authority in how he carried himself, not the pompous arrogance of the mining executives, but the confidence of a man who had earned his position through hard work. He caught her studying him and approached, offering her a canteen of water. "Thank you," she said, taking a modest sip before returning it. "You must have questions," Vincent said, sitting on a nearby rock. Clara had dozens, but propriety and caution kept most unspoken. "What sort of work will I be doing at Sunset Ranch?" she asked instead. "Mrs. Hollister will determine your specific duties, but generally, we need help with cooking, cleaning, and occasionally looking after guests when cattle buyers visit." He paused. "The work won't be easy, but it won't be like what you endured at Blackwater. 8 to 10 hours a day with Sundays free. Fair wages paid weekly." It sounded almost too good to be true. "And my accommodations. There's a small cabin near the main house. It's simple but clean. You'll take most meals with the house staff, though you're welcome to prepare your own if you prefer privacy." Clara nodded, trying to imagine this new life. After a moment, she gathered her courage and asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Mr. Daniels, forgive my boldness, but why did you buy my contract specifically? There were a dozen women in the same situation." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the flowing stream. "I've been negotiating with Blackwater for months, trying to purchase land that borders my property. During those negotiations, I've seen how they treat their contract workers." His jaw tightened. "Yesterday, when I saw you working past sundown after being up since before dawn, it reminded me of someone." He fell silent again, and Clara sensed there was more to the story, something personal he wasn't ready to share. "I couldn't buy everyone's contract," he continued finally. "But I could help one person. When I saw you, how you carried yourself despite everything, I made a choice." His honesty touched something in Clara. "Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful, more than I can express." Vincent nodded, seeming almost embarrassed by her gratitude. He stood, adjusting his hat. "We should continue if we want to reach the ranch before dark." The journey resumed, and as they rode, Vincent occasionally pointed out landmarks or shared bits of information about the area. Clara learned that Sunset Ranch encompassed over 5,000 acres, with streams, grazing land, and forests. Vincent had started with just 100 acres and a small herd, building it into one of the most successful ranching operations in the region over 10 years. "My father was a rancher back in Texas," he explained. "Taught me everything about cattle before he died. I came west with nothing but his old saddle and a dream." "You've accomplished a great deal," Clara observed. Vincent shrugged. "There's always more to do. The West is changing. Railroads, more settlers, new laws. A man has to adapt or get left behind. As the afternoon progressed, the landscape changed subtly. The hills rolled more gently, with broader valleys between them. Cattle appeared, grazing in meadows bright with wildflowers. "Sunset Ranch," Vincent announced as they crested a hill. Below them, nestled in a wide valley with a ribbon of river cutting through it, lay the ranch. The main house was larger than Clara had expected, a handsome two-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around it. Several smaller buildings clustered nearby: a bunkhouse, a barn, stables, and what appeared to be workshops. Further out, she could see corrals, fenced pastures, and smaller cabins dotting the landscape. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from a distance, Clara could make out people moving about, engaged in the daily business of ranch life. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Something like pride flickered across Vincent's face. "It's home." As they rode down into the valley, ranch hands called out greetings to Vincent, and curious glances were directed at Clara. She felt suddenly self-conscious in her worn dress, aware of how inappropriate her appearance must seem riding behind the ranch owner. They dismounted in front of the main house, and Clara tried to smooth her skirts and tuck stray hairs back into place. A stern-looking woman with silver-streaked black hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Daniels, we weren't expecting you back so soon," she said, her sharp eyes taking in Clara with open curiosity. "Mrs. Hollister," Vincent greeted her. "This is Miss Clara Porter. She'll be joining the house staff." Mrs. Hollister raised an eyebrow but nodded. "We can certainly use the help." "Lucy's been down with her back again. Miss Porter has just been released from a labor contract with the mining company," Vincent explained, a warning note in his voice that Clara interpreted as a request for discretion. "She's an experienced hard worker who deserves a fresh start." Understanding seemed to pass between them. Mrs. Hollister's expression softened slightly as she addressed Clara directly. "Well, Miss Porter, you've come at a busy time. We're preparing for the autumn cattle drive, and there's much to be done." "I'm ready to work, madam," Clara assured her. "And I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Let's get you settled first," Mrs. Hollister decided. "You must be tired from the journey." Vincent nodded. "Show her to the maple cabin. It should be suitable." "Yes, sir," Mrs. Hollister replied. "And will you be joining us for dinner?" "Cook's made your favorite stew. I'll be there. First, I need to check on that new breeding bull." With a tip of his hat to Clara, Vincent turned and walked toward the stables, his ranch hands following. Mrs. Hollister gestured for Clara to follow her. "Come along, then." The maple cabin's small but snug. Been empty since our last seamstress left to get married last spring. Clara fell into step beside the older woman, taking in her surroundings with wide eyes. After the drab confines of the mining company, the ranch seemed vibrant with life and purpose. Men worked on repairing fences, women carried baskets of vegetables from a garden, and children darted between buildings, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Mr. Daniels runs a good operation here," Mrs. Hollister remarked as they walked. "Firm but fair. Expects hard work but rewards it properly, not like some places." "I'm beginning to see that," Clara said. They approached a small cabin set apart from the others, beneath the spreading branches of a maple tree that gave it its name. Mrs. Hollister produced a key from her pocket and unlocked the door. The interior was simple but, as promised, clean and welcoming. A bed with a fresh mattress stood against one wall. A small table and 2 chairs occupied a corner, and a modest fireplace with cooking hooks would provide warmth and a means to prepare simple meals. There were shelves for belongings, pegs for clothes, and even a small window with actual glass panes letting in the late afternoon light. "It's lovely," Clara breathed, setting down her meager satchel. "Thought you might need these," Mrs. Hollister said, opening a trunk at the foot of the bed. Inside were linens, a quilt, and some basic housekeeping items. Previous occupant left in a hurry to get married, said to give her things to whoever came next. "That's very kind," Clara said, overwhelmed by the generosity after years of having nothing to call her own. "Get yourself settled. Dinner's at 6 in the main house. You'll hear the bell. Tomorrow morning, come to the kitchen at 7 and I'll show you your duties." Mrs. Hollister paused at the door. "Whatever happened before, Miss Porter, doesn't matter here. It's what you do now that counts." With that, the housekeeper left, closing the door behind her and leaving Clara alone in her new home. For several minutes, Clara simply stood in the center of the room, turning slowly to take it all in. Then, unexpectedly, tears began streaming down her face, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. She sank onto the edge of the bed, pressed her hands to her mouth, and allowed herself to truly feel, for the first time, the magnitude of what had happened. She was free. She had a job with fair wages. She had a private space to call her own. After years of deprivation and despair, hope had returned to her life so suddenly that it was almost painful in its intensity. When the tears subsided, Clara washed her face in the basin provided, unpacked her few belongings, and made the bed with the linens from the trunk. She changed into her other dress, equally worn but at least clean, and attempted to make herself presentable for dinner. The bell rang precisely at 6 o'clock. Clara followed other workers toward the main house, feeling nervous but determined. The dining room for the ranch hands and house staff was a large, airy space with long tables. Mrs. Hollister motioned her to a seat among the house staff, most of whom regarded her with friendly curiosity. "You must be the new girl," said a plump, cheerful woman to her right. "I'm Maggie, one of the cooks." "Clara Porter," she replied, grateful for the friendly face. "Don't worry about remembering everyone tonight," Maggie advised. "There's near 30 of us when everyone's here. You'll learn names as you go." The food was simple but abundant and delicious: beef stew, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden. After years of thin gruel and stale bread at the mining company, Clara had to restrain herself from eating too quickly. Vincent Daniels sat at the head table with his foreman and senior ranch hands. Once or twice, Clara caught him looking in her direction, his expression unreadable. When the meal ended, he stood to address the assembled workers. "For those who haven't heard, we'll be starting the autumn drive 2 weeks from Monday. We're taking 2,000 head to the railroad at Sacramento this year." He paused as excited murmurs rippled through the room. "It'll be our largest drive yet, so everyone needs to pull their weight. Questions can go to Frank." He nodded toward a grizzled man beside him, presumably the foreman. As people began to disperse, Vincent approached Clara's table. Conversations hushed as workers watched with interest. "Miss Porter, have you settled in comfortably?" he asked, his deep voice carrying in the now quiet room. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Daniels," Clara replied, conscious of the many eyes upon them. "The cabin is more than I could have hoped for," he nodded, seeming satisfied. "Mrs. Hollister will see to your training. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask her." "I will, and Mr. Daniels." Clara hesitated, then continued softly, "Thank you again, for everything." Something flickered in his blue eyes, warmth perhaps, or simply acknowledgement. With a brief nod, he turned and left the dining room. "Well now," Maggie said beside her, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "That's interesting." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, confused. "The boss doesn't usually take such a personal interest in new staff," Maggie explained. "Especially not one he brought back himself from town." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "It's not what you might think. Mr. Daniels was simply being kind to someone in a difficult situation." Maggie shrugged, unconvinced. "If you say so, dear. But I've been here 5 years, and I've never seen Vincent Daniels bring a pretty young woman home before." Before Clara could protest further, Mrs. Hollister called for the house staff to help clear the tables, and she was grateful for the distraction. The next morning, Clara reported to the main house kitchen at precisely 7 o'clock, eager to begin her new duties. Mrs. Hollister proved to be demanding but fair, showing Clara around the sprawling ranch house and explaining what would be expected of her. "We run a tight operation here, Mrs. Hollister explained as they walked through the large, well-appointed kitchen. "Cook and her helpers prepare meals for the main house and the bunkhouse. Laundry is done twice weekly for the house, once weekly for the ranch hands. Cleaning is daily, with major cleaning once a month." Clara nodded, taking mental notes. "And what will my specific duties be?" "You'll help with general cleaning, laundry when needed, and assist cook during busy times." Mrs. Hollister paused. "I understand you can sew." "Yes, madam, my mother taught me. I did mending at the mining company." "Good." "We need someone with needle skills. Ranch hands are forever tearing shirts and pants, and with winter coming, There'll be quilts and blankets to repair. By midday, Clara's head was spinning with information, but she felt a deep satisfaction in the work. Unlike her labor at the mining company, where she was treated as little more than machinery, here her efforts were acknowledged with nods of approval and occasional words of thanks. The days fell into a steady rhythm. Clara woke at dawn, attended to her own small cabin, then reported to the main house for her duties. She scrubbed floors, polished silver, mended torn shirts, and helped prepare meals for the ranch's many workers. The labor was hard, but fared nothing like the crushing burden she had carried before. She began to learn the dynamics of Sunset Ranch. Vincent Daniels was respected, even admired, by his workers. He was firm in his expectations but generous with praise and fair with wages. He worked alongside his men frequently, not afraid to get his hands dirty, yet he also understood the business side of ranching, spending hours in his study with ledgers and correspondence. Clara saw him daily but rarely spoke with him directly. He nodded politely when they passed, occasionally asked if she was settling in well, but maintained a professional distance that Clara told herself was entirely appropriate. Still, sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, and it sent an unexpected warmth through her that she tried her best to ignore. As the days passed, Clara's pale complexion began to regain color, and the perpetual exhaustion that had haunted her eyes slowly faded. Mrs. Hollister noticed the change. "You're looking more like a living person and less like a ghost," she remarked one morning as Clara helped knead bread dough. "Some meat on your bones now, too," Clara smiled. "I feel stronger every day. It's amazing what regular meals and proper rest can do. And not being worked like a mule," Mrs. Hollister added pointedly. "Mr. Daniels told me a bit about where he found you, disgraceful, treating people that way." "Yes," Clara agreed quietly. "I was fortunate that Mr. Daniels intervened." Mrs. Hollister gave her a shrewd look. "He's a good man, our Mr. Daniels, too good for his own sake sometimes, takes on other people's troubles." There was something in the older woman's tone that made Clara wonder if there was more to Vincent's history than she knew. But before she could consider asking, the back door opened, and Vincent himself entered the kitchen, removing his hat as he did. "Mrs. Hollister, we've got 2 cattle buyers coming in from San Francisco tomorrow. They'll be staying the night." "We'll have the guest rooms ready, sir," Mrs. Hollister assured him. "Will they be taking all their meals here?" "Yes, dinner tomorrow night will be important. They represent a new railroad connection that could significantly increase our market." His gaze fell on Clara, who had continued kneading the dough, trying to appear focused on her task. "Miss Porter," he acknowledged with a nod. "Mr. Daniels," she replied, glancing up briefly. "How are you finding your position here?" he asked, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of genuine interest. "Very well, thank you. Everyone has been most kind." "Miss Porter has a good hand with mending," Mrs. Hollister interjected. "Fixed that tear in your Sunday coat so neatly you'd never know it happened." Vincent raised an eyebrow, looking impressed. "Is that so? Thank you, Miss Porter. I hadn't even noticed it was repaired." "That's the highest compliment for mending, sir," Clara said with a small smile. "When it can't be noticed at all." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Indeed. Well, I'll leave you ladies to your preparations. Mrs. Hollister, just ensure everything is perfect for our guests. This deal could mean a great deal for Sunset Ranch." After he left, Mrs. Hollister gave Clara another of her knowing looks. "He notices you, you know." Clara felt her cheeks flush. "He notices all his employees, I'm sure. Mr. Daniels seems very attentive to the running of his ranch." Was all Mrs. Hollister said, but her expression spoke volumes. The next day was a flurry of activity as the ranch prepared for the important visitors. Clara was assigned to prepare the guest rooms, ensuring fresh linens, polished furniture, and even small bouquets of late summer wildflowers to brighten the spaces. As she worked, Clara found herself wondering what Vincent Daniels' bedroom looked like. His private quarters were on the second floor of the main house, in a wing that house staff only entered for weekly cleaning when he was out working the range. She had never been assigned that duty, and her curiosity about the man who had changed her fate continued to grow. The cattle buyers arrived in the afternoon, two well-dressed gentlemen with expensive watches and city manners. Clara glimpsed them from the kitchen window as Vincent gave them a tour of the nearby corrals and stables. Even from a distance, she could see Vincent in his element, confident, knowledgeable, proud of what he had built. Dinner that evening was an elaborate affair. Clara helped serve the meal in the formal dining room, moving quietly around the table with dishes of roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables, and homemade bread. The conversation flowed easily, with Vincent skillfully guiding the discussion toward the advantages of his cattle and his ability to meet the railroad's needs. "Quality is what sets Sunset Ranch apart," Vincent was saying as Clara refilled water glasses. "Our stock is healthier, better fed, and better managed than any ranch in the territory." "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Daniels," said the older of the two buyers, a Mr. Harrison. "But what about quantity? The new line will need consistent, large shipments." "We're expanding our breeding program," Vincent replied confidently. "By next year, we'll be able to increase production by 30% without sacrificing quality." As Clara moved around the table, she accidentally bumped Vincent's chair. "Excuse me, sir," she murmured, embarrassed by her clumsiness. "No harm done, Miss Porter," he replied, giving her a reassuring glance before returning to his business discussion. The younger buyer, Mr. Phillips, had been watching the exchange with interest. "Your staff seems well trained, Daniels," he commented, his gaze lingering on Clara in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Particularly the prettier ones." Vincent's expression cooled noticeably. "All my employees are valued for their skills and hard work, Mr. Phillips. I'm fortunate to have reliable people who take pride in their duties." The subtle rebuke was not lost on anyone at the table. Clara felt a rush of gratitude as she retreated to the kitchen, touched by Vincent's defense of her dignity. Later, as the men retired to Vincent's study for brandy and cigars, Clara helped clear the dining room. Through the partially open study door, she could hear their conversation continuing. "Remarkable operation you have here, Daniels," Harrison was saying. "Though I must say, I'm surprised a man of your position and success remains unmarried. A wife would make this fine house a real home." Vincent's reply was measured. "I've been focused on building the ranch. Marriage requires the right person at the right time." "Well, with your prospects improving, I imagine suitable young ladies might become more interested," Phillips remarked with a laugh that suggested he found the topic amusing. "Though out here, the pickings must be rather slim." Clara didn't hear Vincent's response as Cook called her back to the kitchen, but the conversation lingered in her mind as she completed her evening duties. The idea of Vincent Daniels with a wife, some refined lady from San Francisco, perhaps created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest that she tried to dismiss as inappropriate. The cattle buyers left the following morning with promises of contracts and future business. Vincent seemed pleased with the outcome, and the mood throughout the ranch was optimistic. As Clara crossed the yard later that day, carrying a basket of mending back to her cabin, Vincent approached on horseback, returning from escorting the buyers to the main road. "Miss Porter," he called, dismounting smoothly. "A moment if you don't mind." "Of course, Mr. Daniels," she replied, setting down her basket. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair damp with sweat from the afternoon sun. "I wanted to thank you for your assistance with our guests." "Everything was perfect. I only did what was expected, sir. Nevertheless, I appreciate it." He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I also wanted to apologize for Mr. Phillips' inappropriate comment. It was unacceptable." Clara was touched by his concern. "There's no need for you to apologize, Mr. Daniels. I've heard far worse in my time." A shadow crossed his features. "That may be so, but not on my property. Here, everyone is treated with respect." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Clara. "May I ask you something, Mr. Daniels?" "Of course. Why do you care so much about how workers are treated, most successful men in your position?" She trailed off, not wanting to seem critical. Vincent's expression turned reflective. "My mother was indentured after my father died when I was 12. The man who held her contract worked her nearly to death." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I was too young to help her then. I swore that, when I had the means, I would never allow such treatment on my watch. The personal revelation stunned Clara. I'm sorry about your mother. What happened to her? She died before her contract was fulfilled. Pneumonia, they said, but really it was exhaustion and despair. He looked away briefly. I ran away after that, worked cattle drives, saved every penny, learned everything I could about ranching. Eventually bought my first small herd and some land. And built all this, Clara said softly, gesturing to the ranch around them. Vincent nodded, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Everyone deserves a chance to build something for themselves, Miss Porter. Even those who start with nothing. In that moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of understanding, a recognition of shared experiences despite their different circumstances. Thank you for telling me, Clara said simply. Thank you for listening, he replied, then seemed to remember himself, settling his hat back on his head. I should let you get back to your work. Yes, sir. Clara picked up her basket, aware that several ranch hands had noticed their conversation and were watching with undisguised curiosity. As Vincent walked away leading his horse, Clara couldn't help but feel that their relationship had changed in some fundamental way. He was still her employer, still the owner of Sunset Ranch, but now she saw him as something more, a man shaped by his own struggles, driven by personal convictions rather than merely business interests. That evening in her cabin, as she worked on mending by lamplight, Clara found her thoughts repeatedly returning to Vincent Daniels. His story had touched her deeply, creating a connection she hadn't anticipated. She told herself it was merely sympathy and gratitude, nothing more. After all, a man in his position would never seriously consider someone like her, a former indentured worker with no family, no dowry, no social standing. Yet as she finally extinguished her lamp and lay in bed, Clara couldn't deny the warmth that filled her whenever she thought of his blue eyes, or the way her heart had raced when he stood close to her. It was foolish, she knew, but in the privacy of her small cabin, she allowed herself to admit the truth. She was developing feelings for Vincent Daniels. The next few weeks were the busiest Clara had experienced at Sunset Ranch. Preparations for the autumn cattle drive consumed everyone's attention. Extra supplies were ordered, equipment repaired, and provisions prepared. Clara found herself helping cook preserved food for the trail and mending dozens of shirts, pants, and blankets that would be needed during the journey. Vincent was often absent, riding out with his men to check on distant herds and bring them closer to the main ranch. When he was present, he seemed preoccupied, spending long hours in his study with maps and ledgers. Biggest drive we've ever attempted, Maggie explained as she and Clara prepared biscuits for the trail. 2,000 head of cattle to Sacramento, with 20 men on horseback keeping them moving, takes nearly 3 weeks of hard, dangerous work. Will Mr. Daniels go with them? Clara asked, trying to sound merely curious. Maggie nodded. Always does. Leads from the front, that one. It's why the men respect him so much. He never asks them to do what he won't do himself. The thought of Vincent being gone for 3 weeks created an unexpected pang in Clara's chest, which she tried to dismiss. 2 days before the drive was set to begin, Clara was hanging laundry behind the main house when she heard the unmistakable sound of an approaching wagon. Looking up, she saw a smart buggy being driven by a well-dressed man she didn't recognize, with a fashionably attired woman beside him. Clara watched as the buggy pulled up to the main house. Vincent emerged from the stables, looking surprised at the visitors. Even from a distance, Clara could see his posture stiffen slightly as he greeted them. Curiosity got the better of her, and Clara moved her laundry work closer to the house, hoping to catch snippets of conversation. She couldn't make out the words, but the woman's tinkling laugh carried on the breeze as Vincent escorted the visitors into the main house. When Clara returned to the kitchen with her empty basket, she found it abuzz with speculation. It's the Prestons from Sacramento, Maggie informed her excitedly. Mr. Preston owns the bank that finances half the ranches in the territory, and Mrs. Preston is known for her social connections. But it's their daughter, who's the real story. Miss Evelyn Preston is considered the most eligible young lady in Sacramento society. "And she's here?" Clara asked, a sinking feeling in her stomach. "Came with her parents, dressed like she's attending a garden party rather than visiting a working ranch," Mrs. Hollister confirmed with a sniff of disapproval. "Mrs. Preston has been trying to match her with Mr. Daniels for 2 years now." "I see," Clara said quietly, trying to ignore the hollow feeling expanding in her chest. "Should we prepare refreshments?" "Already done," Cook replied. "And we'll need a proper dinner tonight. They'll be staying overnight before continuing to Sacramento tomorrow." Clara threw herself into her work that afternoon, trying not to think about the elegant visitors or why they had come. Of course, someone like Vincent Daniels would eventually marry, and naturally, his bride would be a woman of social standing and refinement, someone who could bring connections and perhaps capital to his growing enterprise. It was none of her business, Clara told herself firmly. She was merely an employee, fortunate to have decent work and a roof over her head. Any other thoughts or feelings were inappropriate and would lead only to disappointment. Still, she couldn't help but notice Vincent's strained expression when she glimpsed him showing the Prestons around the property. The young woman Evelyn walked closely beside him, occasionally touching his arm as she laughed at something he said. She was beautiful, with golden hair arranged in an elaborate style and a blue dress that Clara suspected cost more than she would earn in a year. That evening, Clara was assigned to help serve dinner. The Prestons were seated in the formal dining room with Vincent, the conversation flowing with practiced ease among people accustomed to social niceties. "Your operation has grown impressively, Vincent," Mr. Preston remarked, swirling wine in his glass. "When I first extended credit to you 7 years ago, I admit I had my doubts." "Your faith in me was appreciated, sir," Vincent replied diplomatically. "Sunset Ranch wouldn't be what it is today without that initial support. And what it could become with further investment is even more exciting," Mrs. Preston added with significance in her tone. "The right partnerships could transform it into the premier ranch in California." Clara moved silently around the table, refilling water glasses and removing empty plates. She kept her eyes lowered, but couldn't help noticing how Evelyn Preston leaned toward Vincent, her perfume wafting across the table. "Father says the railroad connection you're establishing could double your business within 2 years," Evelyn said, her voice musical and refined. "How exciting to be at such a turning point. Business growth always brings new challenges along with opportunities," Vincent replied, his tone polite but guarded. As Clara placed a dessert plate before Evelyn, the young woman glanced up at her with the casual disinterest of someone regarding a piece of furniture rather than a person. "The staff seems adequate for your current needs," Mrs. Preston observed, watching Clara. "Though if you expand as planned, you'll need more refined help, particularly if you intend to entertain business associates regularly." Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My staff is exceptional, Mrs. Preston. I'm fortunate to have people of skill and character working for me." Clara felt a flush of gratitude at his defense, even as she recognized the uncomfortable dynamics at play. The Prestons clearly saw Sunset Ranch as an investment opportunity with their daughter as part of the package deal. Later, as she helped clear the dining room after the guests had retired, Clara overheard Vincent speaking with Frank, his foreman, in the hallway. "I don't care how important the Prestons think they are," Vincent was saying, his voice low but intense. "The drive starts as scheduled. I won't delay 2,000 head of cattle and 20 men because Mrs. Preston thinks her daughter needs more time to show me what a suitable ranch mistress she would make." "Yes, sir," Frank replied, though Mr. Preston's backing would make that expansion to the North Pastures easier to finance. "There are other banks," Vincent said firmly, "and I won't be pressured into personal decisions based on business considerations." Clara moved quietly, not wanting them to know she had overheard the private conversation, but a small spark of something like hope flickered in her chest. At least Vincent Daniels wasn't immediately smitten with the beautiful Evelyn Preston. The following morning was chaotic as final preparations for the cattle drive coincided with the Prestons' departure. Clara was sweeping the front porch when Evelyn Preston emerged from the house, looking fresh and lovely despite the early hour. Good morning, Evelyn said, surprising Clara by acknowledging her. You're new here, aren't you? I don't recall seeing you during our visit last year. Yes, miss, Clara replied politely. I've been at Sunset Ranch for about a month. Evelyn studied her with frank curiosity. You speak well for a servant. Were you educated? The question felt invasive, but Clara maintained her composure. My mother taught me reading and writing before she passed, miss. How fortunate for you, Evelyn said with the automatic sympathy of someone who had never experienced real hardship. She glanced toward where Vincent was discussing something with Mr. Preston near the stables. Mr. Daniels is quite impressive, isn't he, building all this from nearly nothing? Yes, miss, the ranch is remarkable. Evelyn's lips curved in a knowing smile. Oh, I wasn't referring to just the ranch. She adjusted her gloves with deliberate precision. My father believes our families would benefit enormously from an alliance. Vincent has the land and the operation. We have the capital and connections to expand it tenfold. Clara said nothing, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the conversation. Of course, Evelyn continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, Vincent is stubborn about maintaining his independence. Men can be so short-sighted sometimes, don't you think? They need a woman's perspective to see the bigger picture. Before Clara could formulate a response, Vincent and Mr. Preston approached, ending the awkward exchange. The buggy is ready, Miss Preston, Vincent said formally. I hope your stay was comfortable. Delightful, Mr. Daniels, Evelyn replied, her tone warming considerably. Though far too brief. Perhaps after your cattle drive, you might consider visiting us in Sacramento. Mother is hosting a harvest ball that would be the perfect opportunity to discuss our mutual interests further. Vincent's expression remained neutral. That's a generous invitation, but autumn is our busiest season. I'll have to see how things stand after the drive. Goodbyes were exchanged with Mrs. Preston embracing Vincent with the familiarity of someone who already considered him family, and Mr. Preston reminding him of various business matters they had discussed. Finally, the buggy departed down the long drive leading to the main road. Clara had retreated to the porch steps, waiting to return to her sweeping once the visitors were gone. To her surprise, Vincent didn't immediately return to his preparations but instead approached her, his expression unreadable. Miss Porter, he said quietly. I noticed you speaking with Miss Preston. I hope she wasn't presumptuous. Clara hesitated, uncertain how to respond without seeming to criticize his guests. Miss Preston was merely making conversation, sir. A hint of a smile touched his lips. You're being diplomatic. Evelyn Preston has many qualities, but subtlety isn't among them. Despite herself, Clara smiled in return. It's not my place to comment on your personal acquaintances, Mr. Daniels. Perhaps not, he agreed, but I find I value your perspective nonetheless. He glanced toward the departing buggy, now just a distant shape on the horizon. The Prestons see Sunset Ranch as an investment opportunity with their daughter as part of the transaction. Clara was startled by his frankness. That seems calculating. It's how their world works, Vincent said with a shrug. Marriages are business arrangements designed to consolidate wealth and influence. He looked directly at her, his blue eyes intense. I built this ranch from nothing, Miss Porter. I won't have its future or my own decided by anyone else's ambitions. The conviction in his voice stirred something within Clara. That seems only right, sir. A person should choose their own path. Yes, he agreed softly, their own path and their own heart. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Vincent cleared his throat and straightened his shoulders. The cattle drive leaves at dawn tomorrow. I'll be gone for nearly 3 weeks. He hesitated, then added, Take care of yourself while I'm away, Miss Porter. And you, Mr. Daniels, she replied. Safe travels. With a brief nod, he turned and strode toward the stables, where men were already gathering for final instructions. Clara watched him go, her heart beating a strange rhythm against her ribs. The ranch felt oddly empty after the cattle drive departed. A skeleton crew remained to handle daily operations, but without Vincent and most of the ranch hands, the atmosphere was subdued. Clara continued her duties, finding comfort in the routine of work, but she couldn't deny that she missed the brief interactions with Vincent that had brightened her days. One evening, 2 weeks into the cattle drive, Clara was sitting on the small porch of her cabin, mending by the last light of sunset when Mrs. Hollister approached. "Mind if I join you?" the older woman asked, indicating the second chair. "Please do," Clara replied, setting aside her sewing. Mrs. Hollister settled herself with a sigh. "These old bones appreciate the rest at day's end." She glanced at Clara with shrewd eyes. "You've taken well to life here, Miss Porter, better than I expected, truth be told." "It's a good place," Clara said simply. "With good people." Mrs. Hollister nodded. "You know, I've been with Mr. Daniels since he first bought this land. Was cooking for a logging camp when he came through, looking for someone to feed his first handful of ranch hands. Saw something in that young man, determination, yes, but also decency." Clara listened, curious about this glimpse into Vincent's early days. "He was just 24 then, with more dreams than dollars," Mrs. Hollister continued. "Worked alongside his men from sunup to sundown, then did figures by lamplight, never asked anyone to do what he wouldn't do himself." "He seems to have maintained that philosophy," Clara observed. "Indeed." Mrs. Hollister gave her a measured look. "In 10 years, I've never seen him take a personal interest in anyone the way he has with you." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Hollister, I'm sure you're mistaken. Mr. Daniels merely took pity on my situation." The older woman made a dismissive sound. "Vincent Daniels doesn't do pity. Compassion, yes. Justice, certainly, but not pity." She leaned forward slightly. "He watches you, you know, when he thinks no one notices." I don't know what to say to that," Clara admitted, her heart fluttering uncomfortably. "Say nothing, if you prefer. But consider this. A man like Vincent could have his pick of women like Evelyn Preston, wealthy, well-connected, bred to be the wife of an important man." Mrs. Hollister's gaze was penetrating. "Yet he keeps finding reasons to avoid their company." Before Clara could respond, a rider appeared on the road leading to the ranch, approaching at a gallop. Both women stood, alarmed by the urgency of the rider's pace. "That's silly, Mrs. Hollister said, recognizing one of the younger ranch hands who had gone on the cattle drive. "Something's wrong." They hurried to the main yard where Lee was already dismounting, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. "Mrs. Hollister," he called. "Need the doctor, quick." "Mr. Daniels has been hurt." Clara felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "Hurt? How badly?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Lee glanced at her, his expression grave. "Bad enough. Stampede 2 days ago. Boss got thrown from his horse, then trampled. Frank sent me to fetch the doctor while they bring him back slow in the wagon." Mrs. Hollister had already sprung into action. "Tom," she called to a stable hand, "ride for Dr. Whitman in Sonora fast as you can. Tell him it's urgent." She turned to Ellie. "When will they arrive with Mr. Daniels?" "Tomorrow morning, likely. They're moving careful because of his injuries." Clara stood frozen, horror building within her as she imagined Vincent broken and bleeding, jostled in a wagon over rough terrain. "Miss Porter," Mrs. Hollister's voice cut through her daze, "we need to prepare. The master bedroom needs to be ready for Mr. Daniels, and we'll need clean linens, bandages, and hot water when they arrive." "Yes, of course," Clara replied, grateful for direction. "What else can I do, pray?" Mrs. Hollister said simply. "And then help me get everything ready. It's going to be a long night." Sleep was impossible. After preparing Vincent's bedroom and gathering medical supplies, Clara found herself pacing her small cabin, her mind filled with terrible images and fears. The thought of Vincent strong, capable Vincent seriously injured or worse, was almost unbearable. In those dark hours, Clara could no longer deny the truth she had been avoiding. She had fallen in love with Vincent Daniels. Not just gratitude for her freedom, not just admiration for his character, but love deep, painful, and probably hopeless. Dawn broke with no sign of the wagon. Dr. Whitman arrived from Sonora, a serious, bearded man with kind eyes who waited patiently in the main house, reviewing the medical supplies that had been gathered. Finally, near midday, the lookout posted at the edge of the ranch property called out, "Wagon coming." Clara stood with the others in the yard, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, watching as the slow-moving wagon finally appeared on the road. Frank drove the team, his weathered face set in grim lines. Beside him sat another ranch hand, and in the back, lying on a makeshift bed of blankets, was Vincent. Even from a distance, Clara could see that he was unconscious, his face pale beneath several days' growth of beard, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his head. As the wagon pulled into the yard, Dr. Whitman took immediate control. "Bring him inside, carefully. I need to examine him properly." 4 strong ranch hands gently lifted Vincent from the wagon and carried him into the house, following the doctor's instructions. Clara moved to follow, but Mrs. Hollister caught her arm. "Let the doctor work," she said firmly. "We'll help when he calls for us." The waiting was excruciating. Ranch hands gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Frank provided what details he could. A sudden lightning storm had spooked the herd, causing a stampede. Vincent had been trying to turn the leaders when his horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and went down. He'd been unconscious more than he'd been awake since then, with a severe head injury, possibly broken ribs and extensive bruising. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Dr. Whitman emerged from the house, looking tired but not defeated. "He's stable," the doctor announced to the assembled workers. "Concussion, 3 broken ribs, a broken collarbone, and significant bruising, but no internal bleeding that I can detect. He's a strong man, which is in his favor." Relief washed through the crowd, though concern remained evident on every face. "He'll need constant care for at least 2 weeks," Dr. Whitman continued. "Complete bed rest, careful monitoring for fever or worsening symptoms, and pain management. I can stay tonight, but then I must return to Sonora. Is there someone who can nurse him?" "I will," Clara said, stepping forward before she could reconsider. Every face turned toward her, but she stood firm. "I helped care for my mother when she was ill. I know what to do, Doctor." Whitman assessed her carefully, then nodded. "Very well. Mrs. Hollister can assist you. I'll show you both what needs to be done." The next few hours were a blur of instructions. How to check Vincent's pupils for signs of worsening head injury, how to bind his ribs without restricting his breathing, how to recognize fever or infection, what medicines to administer and when. Finally, Clara was allowed to see him. She entered Vincent's bedroom, a large, simply furnished room with a massive 4-poster bed, with trepidation. He lay unnaturally still, his strong frame looking somehow diminished against the white sheets. Bandages wrapped his torso and head, and dark bruises marked the visible portions of his chest and arms. Clara's throat tightened with emotion, but she forced herself to remain composed. This was no time for tears or confessions of feelings. Vincent needed professional care, not emotional complications. "He may drift in and out of consciousness," Dr. Whitman explained quietly. "When awake, he might be confused or disoriented. That's normal with head injuries. The important thing is to keep him calm and still." Clara nodded, taking her position in a chair beside the bed. "I understand." The doctor studied her with thoughtful eyes. "You care for him, don't you?" "Beyond the obligation of employment," Clara hesitated, then met his gaze directly. "Mr. Daniels saved me from a terrible situation. I owe him everything. Of course I care." Dr. Whitman didn't press further, merely nodding as if her answer had confirmed something he already suspected. The first night was the hardest. Vincent remained unconscious, his breathing sometimes labored, occasionally murmuring incoherently. Clara sat vigilant, checking his pulse regularly, adjusting his blankets, and gently pressing cool cloths to his forehead when he seemed feverish. Dr. Whitman checked on them throughout the night, seeming satisfied with Clara's nursing. By morning, he confirmed that Vincent's condition remained stable, not worse, though not significantly better either. "I must return to Sonora," the doctor said, packing his bag. "I have other patients who need me, but I'll return in 3 days to check his progress. Send for me immediately if his condition worsens." Clara promised she would, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. As the doctor left, Mrs. Hollister entered with a tray of food and fresh coffee. "You need to eat," the housekeeper insisted, setting the tray down. "You'll be no good to him if you collapse from exhaustion." Clara nodded gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since the previous morning. "Has there been any word from the cattle drive? Frank sent most of the men on with the herd," Mrs. Hollister explained. "They were too close to Sacramento to turn back. A skeleton crew should reach the railhead in a few days, handle the sail, and return. That's good, Clara said, relief evident in her voice. Mr. Daniels would want the drive completed. Mrs. Hollister studied her with knowing eyes. You should rest. I can sit with him for a few hours. I'm fine for now, Clara insisted. Perhaps later. The older woman shook her head slightly but didn't argue. You know where to find me if you need anything. Alone again with Vincent, Clara allowed herself to really look at him. Even in his injured state, there was a strength to his features, the strong line of his jaw now covered in dark stubble, the broad shoulders that had carried so much responsibility. Impulsively, she reached out and gently took his hand, careful not to disturb the bandages. You need to get better, Mr. Daniels, she said softly. Your ranch needs you, your people need you, she swallowed hard. I need you. As if in response, Vincent's fingers twitched slightly in her grasp. Clara's heart leaped, but he remained otherwise still, his eyes closed. Days passed in a blur of nursing duties. Clara slept in short stretches on a cot that had been set up in Vincent's room, never leaving him alone for more than minutes at a time. Mrs. Hollister brought regular meals and occasionally relieved her, but Clara insisted on handling most of the care herself. Vincent drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to take sips of water or broth, other times confused and restless. During one feverish episode, he called out for his mother, the anguish in his voice bringing tears to Clara's eyes. On the fourth day, Dr. Whitman returned as promised, examining Vincent thoroughly. The head injury is healing, he reported, sounding cautiously optimistic. His ribs will take longer, 6 weeks at least, but I'm no longer concerned about internal bleeding. When will he be fully conscious? Clara asked, exhaustion evident in her voice despite her efforts to hide it. Hard to predict with head injuries, the doctor replied. But I expect significant improvement within the next few days. You've done well, Miss Porter. Your care has been exemplary. Clara flushed at the praise. I've only done what anyone would do. No, the doctor said kindly. You've done much more, but you need rest yourself. Doctor's orders. That evening, after Dr. Whitman had departed again, Clara sat beside Vincent's bed, reading aloud from one of the books she had found in his study, a volume of poetry that had surprised her with its worn pages and careful annotations in Vincent's strong handwriting. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, she reads softly, and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Emily Dickinson, came a hoarse voice from the bed. Clara's head jerked up, the book falling from her hands. Vincent's eyes were open, clear and focused for the first time in days, watching her with a mixture of confusion and something warmer. Mr. Daniels, she exclaimed, leaning forward. You're awake, apparently, he replied, his voice rough from disuse. He tried to shift position and winced. Though I'm beginning to wish I wasn't. What happened? Relief flooded through Clara. You were injured during the cattle drive, a stampede. Your horse fell and you were trampled. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Vincent frowned, concentration evident on his face as he pieced together memories. The storm, I remember the lightning, the herd panicked. His eyes widened suddenly. The drive, the cattle, Frank sent men to complete it, Clara assured him quickly. They should reach Sacramento within days. He relaxed slightly, then seemed to fully register his surroundings and Clara's presence beside his bed. How long have I been here? And his eyes took in her rumpled dress and the evident fatigue on her face. How long have you been here? You've been back at the ranch for 4 days, Clara explained, pouring a small glass of water from the pitcher beside the bed. Here, try to drink a little. She helped him raise his head slightly, supporting him as he took careful sips. The simple intimacy of the gesture wasn't lost on either of them. You've been taking care of me, Vincent said as she gently lowered his head back to the pillow. It wasn't a question. Yes, Clara admitted, along with Mrs. Hollister and Dr. Whitman. But mostly you, he guessed, his blue eyes studying her face. You look exhausted, Clara smiled despite herself. You're hardly in a position to critique my appearance, Mr. Daniels. You've looked better yourself. A surprised chuckle escaped him, followed immediately by a grimace of pain. Don't make me laugh, feels like I've been kicked by a mule. Broken ribs, Clara confirmed, Among other injuries, you need to lie still and heal. Vincent's expression turned serious. Thank you, Clara, he said quietly, using her first name for the first time. The simple intimacy of hearing her name on his lips sent warmth spreading through Clara's chest. You saved my life, she replied softly. This is the least I could do. Their eyes met and held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Vincent's eyelids began to droop, exhaustion claiming him again. Rest, Clara urged, gently adjusting his blankets. I'll be here when you wake. Vincent's recovery progressed steadily over the following days. His periods of consciousness grew longer, his mind clearer. Dr. Whitman, visiting again, pronounced himself satisfied with the healing process, though he insisted on continued bed rest for at least another week. Those ribs won't mend if you're up and about too soon, the doctor warned sternly. And that concussion was severe. Your brain needs time to heal. Vincent accepted the doctor's orders with better grace than Clara had expected. Perhaps his injuries had humbled him, or perhaps he simply recognized the wisdom in the advice. Either way, he remained in bed, though he insisted on receiving reports from Frank about the ranch's operations and the outcome of the cattle drive. The sale went better than expected, Frank reported during one such visit. Railroad paid top dollar, just like you negotiated. We're in good shape financially heading into winter. Good, Vincent replied, satisfaction evident in his voice despite his weakened condition. And the breeding stock, doing fine. New bull is settling in well with the herd. As Frank provided additional details, Clara moved quietly around the room, straightening items and changing water in the wash basin, not wanting to intrude but unable to leave Vincent entirely alone as his strength was still limited. After Frank departed, Vincent watched Clara for several minutes as she folded fresh linens. You don't have to stay, you know, he said finally. I'm well enough that Mrs. Hollister could check on me periodically. Clara looked up, a flash of hurt crossing her features before she masked it. Are you dismissing me from nursing duties, Mr. Daniels? No, he said quickly. That's not what I meant, you've hardly left this room in 10 days. You must have other duties, other things you'd prefer to be doing. Clara set down the linens and approached his bedside. Do you want me to leave? She asked directly. Vincent hesitated, then admitted quietly, no. A small smile touched Clara's lips. Then I'll stay. At least until Dr. Whitman says you no longer need constant care. Vincent studied her face, his blue eyes intent. Why, Clara? Why have you dedicated yourself to my care so completely? It was a question Clara had been dreading, one that required either evasion or honesty that might change everything between them. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Because you matter to me, she said simply. More than perhaps you should. Vincent's expression softened, something like hope flickering in his eyes. He reached out, his hand finding hers where it rested on the edge of the bed. You matter to me too, Clara, he replied, his voice low and serious. From the moment I saw you at the mining company, something about you called to me. I told myself it was just compassion, just recognizing another human being in an unjust situation. But it was more than that. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Mr. Daniels, Vincent, he corrected gently. I think we're well past formalities, don't you? Vincent, she amended, the name feeling strange and wonderful on her lips. I don't know what to say. I'm your employee. You're a man who's realizing what matters most, he finished for her. Nearly dying has a way of clarifying one's priorities. Before Clara could respond, there was a knock at the door. Reluctantly, she withdrew her hand from Vincent's and called, Come in. Mrs. Hollister entered with a tray of food, her shrewd eyes taking in the charged atmosphere of the room. Dinner for both of you, she announced, setting the tray on a small table. Miss Porter, you should eat while it's hot. I'll sit with Mr. Daniels for a bit. Clara recognized the directive for what it was, a chance to collect herself and gain some perspective away from Vincent's intense presence. Thank you, Mrs. Hollister. I could use some fresh air. Outside, the autumn afternoon was crisp and golden. Clara walked to her cabin where she washed her face with cold water, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Vincent had admitted to having feelings for her, feelings that apparently predated her employment at Sunset Ranch. It seemed impossible, yet the sincerity in his eyes had been unmistakable. but what future could there be for them? He was a successful rancher, increasingly connected to important business circles. She was a former indentured servant with no family, no dowry, no social standing. Even if Vincent himself didn't care about such differences, the world around them certainly would. And what of women like Evelyn Preston? Beautiful, educated, well-connected, the sort of wife who could help Vincent expand his business empire, who could move comfortably in the social circles his growing success would require him to navigate. Clara stared at her reflection in the small mirror above her washbasin. The weeks of caring for Vincent had left her pale and tired, her simple dress wrinkled from long hours at his bedside. What could she possibly offer a man like him, beyond devotion that might soon seem provincial and limiting? When she returned to the main house an hour later, Mrs. Hollister met her in the hallway outside Vincent's room. "He's sleeping," the housekeeper informed her. "Best not to disturb him. You should get some proper rest yourself in your own cabin tonight." "I'll stay in the adjoining room and check on him." Clara hesitated, reluctant to leave Vincent's care to others after so many days of being his primary nurse. "Are you certain? I don't mind staying." Mrs. Hollister's expression softened slightly. "I'm certain, and Clara." She rarely used her first name. "Be careful with your heart, and his." The simple warning confirmed what Clara had suspected. Her feelings for Vincent and his for her had not gone unnoticed by the observant housekeeper. "I have no intention of causing harm," Clara said quietly. "Sometimes harm comes uninvited, especially when feelings are involved," Mrs. Hollister replied. "Just proceed with caution for both your sakes." That night, in her own bed for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, Clara lay awake for hours, Mrs. Hollister's warning echoing in her mind. The sensible course would be to step back, to resume her normal duties once Vincent no longer needed nursing, to maintain a proper employer-employee relationship. Yet her heart rebelled at the thought. The connection between them felt rare and precious, something that had developed not despite their different circumstances, but perhaps because of the unique perspectives those circumstances had given them. Both had known hardship and loss. Both understood the value of freedom and self-determination. Both recognized that a person's worth came not from their social position, but from their character and actions. Clara finally drifted into exhausted sleep without reaching any firm decision, trusting that the path forward would become clearer with time. The next morning she was up at dawn, refreshed by a full night's sleep in her own bed. After washing and changing into a clean dress, she headed to the main house, her step lighter than it had been in days. Mrs. Hollister met her in the kitchen. "He had a good night," the housekeeper reported. "Fever's completely gone and he ate a decent breakfast. Dr. Whitman is coming today for another examination." Clara nodded, relief evident in her expression. "That's wonderful news." "He's been asking for you," Mrs. Hollister added, a hint of warning in her tone, "since he woke up." "I'll go to him now," Clara replied, choosing to ignore the implied caution. Vincent was sitting up in bed when she entered his room, propped against several pillows, a ledger open on his lap, despite Dr. Whitman's instructions to avoid mental strain. He looked markedly better. Some color had returned to his face, and though the bruises on his visible skin had progressed to an ugly yellowish-purple stage, they were clearly healing. His face brightened when he saw her. "Clara," he greeted her, closing the ledger. "You look rested." "As do you," she replied, approaching the bed with a smile. "Though I see you're ignoring the doctor's orders about avoiding work." Vincent gave her a sheepish grin that transformed his face, making him look younger and more carefree than she had ever seen him. "I was going mad with boredom. Just reviewing some figures from the cattle sale." "Well, put it away now," Clara instructed, taking the ledger from him and setting it on the bedside table. "Dr. Whitman is coming today, and he won't be pleased if he finds you taxing yourself." Vincent caught her hand as she withdrew it, his larger one engulfing hers with gentle warmth. "I missed you this morning," he said quietly. "I've grown accustomed to waking up and finding you here." Clara's heart skipped a beat at the simple admission. "I was only across the yard, getting some rest as everyone insisted I should." "Nevertheless," Vincent replied, his blue eyes holding hers, "I missed you." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the attraction between them almost palpable in the morning light streaming through the window. Then Clara gently reclaimed her hand. "Are you hungry?" she asked, moving toward the tray Mrs. Hollister had prepared. "There's fresh bread and preserves." Vincent allowed the change of subject, though his eyes continued to follow her movements with undisguised interest. "Actually, I was thinking of trying to get up today, just to sit in a chair for a while." Clara turned, alarm crossing her features. "Dr. Whitman said complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. It's only been 11 days. "I'm going mad lying here," Vincent protested. "Just to the chair by the window. You could help me." Clara hesitated, torn between enforcing the doctor's orders and sympathizing with Vincent's restlessness. "Let's wait until after Dr. Whitman's visit," she suggested diplomatically. "If he approves, I'll help you then." Vincent sighed but nodded in agreement. Always the voice of reason. Dr. Whitman arrived mid-morning, examining Vincent thoroughly while Clara waited outside the bedroom. When the doctor emerged, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "The head injury has healed remarkably well," he reported. "And the ribs are knitting nicely. He's a strong man with a good constitution." "Does that mean he can get up?" Clara asked. Dr. Whitman considered this. "Briefly and with assistance. A short time sitting up in a chair would be acceptable. But no work, no stress, and absolutely no riding or physical exertion for at least another 2 weeks." Clara nodded, relieved at the progress, but concerned about Vincent's tendency to push limits. "I'll make sure he follows your instructions." "I'm counting on it," the doctor replied with a knowing smile. "He seems to listen to you better than to me." After the doctor left, Clara returned to Vincent's room, finding him already attempting to swing his legs over the side of the bed. "Not so fast," she admonished, hurrying to his side. "You heard the doctor. With assistance only." Vincent grimaced as pain shot through his ribs, but he didn't argue. "I would welcome your assistance then." Together, they managed to get him upright and, with careful, slow movements, across to the comfortable chair near the window. Vincent was pale and sweating by the time he was seated, his jaw clenched against the pain, but satisfaction gleamed in his eyes as he looked out across his ranch. "Worth it," he declared, gazing at the autumn landscape, golden in the midday sun. "I've missed seeing the world from a vertical position." Clara laughed softly, arranging a blanket across his legs. 10 minutes only for today, then back to bed." Vincent nodded, then reached for her hand, drawing her attention fully to him. "Clara, there's something I need to say now that I'm thinking clearly again." Her heart fluttered nervously. "Yes. What I said yesterday about my feelings for you, it wasn't just the medication or the circumstances. I meant every word." Clara swallowed hard, aware that this conversation could change everything between them. "Vincent, please, let me finish," he said gently. "I know there are complications. I'm your employer. There are social expectations and practical considerations, but none of that changes how I feel." "And how do you feel?" Clara asked softly, needing to hear the words directly. Vincent's blue eyes held her steadily. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara Porter. Perhaps have been since the moment I saw you maintaining your dignity despite impossible circumstances." The simple, direct declaration stole Clara's breath. A part of her had known, had hoped, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "You don't need to respond now," Vincent continued when she remained silent. "I understand this is unexpected and perhaps unwelcome, but I needed you to know the truth without ambiguity." Clara found her voice at last. "It's not unwelcome," she whispered, "just overwhelming. I felt drawn to you from the beginning, but I never imagined you might return those feelings." "You're Vincent Daniels, owner of Sunset Ranch. Don't," he interrupted firmly. "Don't diminish yourself. You're Clara Porter, intelligent, compassionate, stronger than anyone I've ever met. Where you came from, what you've endured, those things have shaped you, but they don't define you. And they certainly don't determine your worth." Tears welled in Clara's eyes at his passionate defense. "The world won't see it that way." "Then the world is wrong," Vincent replied simply. "And I've never much cared what the world thinks anyway." Despite herself, Clara smiled through her tears. "That's evident in many of your choices." Vincent returned her smile, his expression softening. "Just think about it, that's all I ask." Before she could respond, a knock at the door announced Mrs. Hollister with a lunch tray. The moment for intimate conversation had passed, but the words exchanged lingered between them, changing the atmosphere in subtle but unmistakable ways. Over the next week, Vincent's recovery accelerated. He progressed from sitting in a chair for a few minutes to walking short distances within his room, his strength returning visibly with each passing day. Clara continued as his primary caretaker, but as his need for medical attention diminished, their interactions took on a different quality, less nurse and patient, more two people exploring a deepening connection. They talked for hours about books. Vincent's library was extensive and eclectic. About their childhoods, both had known poverty and loss, though in different ways, about their dreams and hopes. Clara found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she had never expressed to anyone, and Vincent responded with an openness that suggested he rarely revealed himself so completely either. One afternoon, as Vincent sat in his chair reading while Clara mended a shirt nearby, he looked up suddenly. "What do you want, Clara? Not just for tomorrow or next month, but for your life?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "I'm not sure I understand." "Before I came to the mining company," Vincent clarified, setting his book aside, "what future did you imagine for yourself once your contract ended? What dreams did you have?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I suppose I hardly dared to dream beyond freedom," she admitted. "Just to control my own time, my own labor, perhaps eventually save enough for a small place of my own." "And now," Vincent pressed gently, "what do you want now?" Clara hesitated, aware of the dangerous territory they were entering. "I want purpose, connection. To build something meaningful, whether that's a home or a business or relationships that matter. With someone who sees your true value," Vincent suggested softly. "Yes," Clara agreed, meeting his gaze. "With someone who sees me as I am, not as circumstances have labeled me." The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Vincent opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the door opened abruptly. "Mr. Daniels," Frank burst in, seemingly oblivious to the intimate moment he was interrupting. "Riders coming, it's the Prestons." Vincent's expression darkened momentarily before smoothing into careful neutrality. "The Prestons, did they send word they were coming?" "No, sir. Lookout just spotted them about 10 minutes out." Vincent sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw, which now bore a neatly trimmed beard he'd grown during his convalescence. "Very well. Help me dress properly, Frank. Miss Porter, perhaps you could inform Mrs. Hollister that we'll have guests for dinner." The formal use of her surname wasn't lost on Clara. With the Prestons' arrival, the real world, with all its social distinctions and expectations, had intruded on their private cocoon of recovery and growing feelings. "Of course, Mr. Daniels," she replied, matching his formality as she gathered her mending and stood. "I'll see to it immediately." As she left the room, Clara couldn't help but wonder if the Prestons' arrival marked an end to the intimate connection that had been developing between her and Vincent. Would the presence of Evelyn Preston, beautiful, wealthy, socially appropriate Evelyn, remind Vincent of the practical realities that should guide his choices? The thought created a hollow ache in Clara's chest as she headed to the kitchen to find Mrs. Hollister. The Prestons arrived in the same smart buggy as before, though this time Mrs. Preston and Evelyn were dressed in traveling clothes more appropriate for a ranch visit. Mr. Preston looked serious, almost grim, as he handed his wife and daughter down from the buggy. Clara watched from the kitchen window as Vincent emerged from the house to greet them, moving slowly but under his own power. Even from a distance, she could see the shock on the Prestons' faces when they took in his still healing appearance. "Oh my," Maggie murmured beside her, also watching the scene. "Miss Evelyn doesn't look pleased to see the boss in such a state." Indeed, Evelyn's expression had shifted from anticipation to barely concealed dismay as she noted Vincent's bandages and the careful way he carried himself. "Mrs. Hollister said they weren't expected," Clara remarked, trying to sound merely curious rather than concerned. "No, and it's strange timing with the boss still recovering," Maggie agreed. "But Mr. Preston's bank holds notes on half the ranches in the territory." When a banker comes calling, you answer the door even if you're half dead. Clara continued her duties throughout the afternoon, deliberately avoiding the main areas of the house where the Prestons might be. She had no official reason to interact with Vincent's guests, and she had no desire to face Evelyn Preston's dismissive gaze or Mrs. Preston's calculating assessment. But as dinner preparation began, Mrs. Hollister sought her out. "Miss Porter, I need you to help serve tonight. Lucy's down with that cough again, and Maggie needs to stay in the kitchen with Cook." Clara's heart sank, but she nodded obediently. "Of course, Mrs. Hollister. Wear your good dress," the housekeeper added, "the blue one, and put your hair up properly." The instructions surprised Clara as Mrs. Hollister rarely concerned herself with the appearance of staff beyond basic cleanliness and neatness. But she didn't argue. Returning to her cabin to change into the one decent dress, she owned a simple blue cotton with minimal trim that Mrs. Hollister had given her from a box of clothing left by a former employee. As she pinned her hair into a neat arrangement, Clara couldn't help but compare her modest appearance to the elegant gowns and elaborate hairstyles Evelyn Preston favored. The contrast was stark, a visual reminder of the vast social gulf between them. When Clara entered the dining room with a pitcher of water, the conversation around the table hushed momentarily. Vincent, seated at the head with Mr. Preston to his right and Mrs. Preston to his left, glanced up, a flicker of something warm passing through his eyes as they met hers. Evelyn, seated beside her father, turned to look at Clara with undisguised curiosity. "You're the maid I spoke with during our last visit," Evelyn remarked, recognition dawning in her eyes. "The one with the unusual diction." Clara inclined her head slightly. "Yes, Miss. Miss Porter has become an invaluable member of our household staff," Vincent said, his tone neutral but his choice of words deliberate. "Household staff, not servant or maid. In fact, she's been primarily responsible for my care during my recovery." Mrs. Preston's eyebrows rose. "Indeed, how unusual to have a housemaid serve as nurse." "Miss Porter has many talents," Vincent replied evenly. "I've been fortunate to benefit from them." The conversation shifted to business matters as Clara continued serving, moving quietly around the table. She could feel Evelyn's gaze following her occasionally, assessing and recalculating, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "We were shocked to hear about your accident, Vincent," Mrs. Preston said as the main course was served. "You might have been killed. It reinforces the dangers of this frontier lifestyle." "Ranching has risks," Vincent agreed, "as does any worthwhile endeavor. But surely as your operation grows, you could delegate the more dangerous aspects," Mr. Preston suggested. "A man in your position should be focusing on business strategy, not riding with the herd." Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I believe in leading by example, Mr. Preston. I won't ask my men to do what I won't do myself." "A noble sentiment," Evelyn interjected, "but perhaps impractical as your responsibilities grow." She smiled warmly at Vincent. "After all, you have people depending on you now. Your decisions affect more than just yourself." "I'm well aware of my responsibilities," Vincent replied, his tone cooler than before. Clara kept her expression carefully neutral as she moved around the table, but inside, her thoughts were churning. The Prestons clearly had an agenda to convince Vincent to take a more appropriate role as a businessman rather than a working rancher, to remind him of social expectations that came with growing wealth and influence. And Evelyn's calculated concern seemed designed to position herself as the natural partner for this more elevated version of Vincent Daniels. After dinner, Clara was clearing dessert plates when Mr. Preston cleared his throat significantly. "Vincent, might we speak privately about the matter that brought us here?" he asked. "Perhaps in your study," Vincent nodded, though Clara noticed the weariness in his eyes. He had been up longer today than any day since his injury, and the strain was showing. "Of course." As the men rose, Mrs. Preston turned to her daughter. "Evelyn, dear, perhaps you could entertain us with some music while the men talk business. I noticed a piano in the sitting room." "I'd be delighted," Evelyn replied, gracefully rising from her chair, "though I'm afraid my repertoire might be wasted on the frontier." The comment, seemingly innocuous, carried a subtle barb, a reminder that Sunset Ranch, for all its success, was still a world away from the cultured society of Sacramento or San Francisco. Clara finished clearing the table as Mrs. Preston and Evelyn moved to the sitting room. Through the open doorway, she could hear Evelyn playing the piano, a simple piece, but performed with technical proficiency if little emotional depth. As Clara carried the last of the dishes to the kitchen, she passed Vincent's study, where the door stood slightly ajar. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but Mr. Preston's raised voice carried clearly into the hallway. More than generous offer, Vincent. The bank would assume all outstanding debts, provide capital for expansion, and guarantee you a managing position with considerable autonomy. It sounds like you're trying to buy my ranch, Nathan, Vincent replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. Buy into, not buy out, Preston corrected smoothly. A partnership that would benefit us both. Your operation has potential, but you need capital to realize it. And frankly, after this accident, it's clear you need more support. I appreciate your concern, Vincent said, not sounding appreciative at all, but Sunset Ranch isn't for sale in whole or in part. There was a pause, then Preston's voice again, lower and more serious. Consider carefully, Vincent. The railroad deal is promising, but one bad season could still set you back significantly. The bank's offer provides security. And control, Vincent added pointedly. No, thank you, Nathan. I built Sunset Ranch from nothing, and I'll continue building it my way. Clara moved quickly past the door before she could be discovered listening, her heart pounding. So that was the Prestons' true purpose in coming, not just a social visit, not even primarily a matchmaking attempt, but a business proposition designed to bring Sunset Ranch under the bank's influence. Later that evening, as the Prestons retired to their guest rooms, Clara was tidying the sitting room when Vincent entered, looking exhausted but determined. Clara, he said softly, making sure they weren't overheard. I need to speak with you. Can you come to my study in 10 minutes? Of course, she replied, concerned by the intensity in his expression. Is everything all right? It will be, he said cryptically, then left the room. 10 minutes later, Clara knocked quietly on the study door. Vincent's deep voice called for her to enter. She found him standing by the window, looking out into the darkness, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. Close the door, please, he requested without turning. Clara did so, then waited, uncertain why he had summoned her or what he might want to discuss. Finally, Vincent turned to face her. You heard my conversation with Preston earlier, didn't you? Clara flushed with embarrassment at being caught eavesdropping. I didn't mean to listen. I was passing by with dishes and it's all right, Vincent interrupted, a small smile softening his features. I'm not angry. In fact, I'm glad you know. Know what? Clara asked, confused. What they really want. Vincent moved to his desk, picking up a document that lay there. This is a formal proposal from Preston's bank to invest in Sunset Ranch. It amounts to them gradually taking control of everything I've built, with me reduced to a manager carrying out their directives. Clara's brow furrowed. But why would they think you'd agree to such a thing? Because they believe I'm vulnerable right now, Vincent explained, setting the document down with distaste. Physically weakened, possibly concerned about the future after my brush with death. And they're not entirely wrong about the vulnerability running a ranch. This size requires constant reinvestment, which means carrying debt that could become dangerous if conditions change. What will you do? Clara asked quietly. Vincent's blue eyes met hers directly. Refuse them, of course. But that's not why I asked you here. He moved closer, close enough that Clara could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could detect the faint scent of soap and leather that she had come to associate with him. Preston made it very clear that their offer includes more than financial partnership, Vincent continued. Evelyn is part of the package, the social connection that would cement the business relationship, elevate Sunset Ranch from a successful operation to part of Sacramento's business elite. Clara's heart constricted painfully. I see, that's a significant opportunity. It's a cage, Vincent corrected firmly. Gilded, but a cage nonetheless. Everything I've built would gradually become someone else's, including my future. Hope flickered in Clara's chest, though she tried to temper it with caution. What does this have to do with me, Vincent? Vincent took her hands in his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. Everything, Clara. Because when Preston was outlining all the advantages of this arrangement, the capital, the connections, the security, all I could think about was that accepting it would mean giving up any chance of a future with you. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Vincent. I know it's soon, he continued earnestly. I know we're still learning about each other, but I also know what I feel, and nearly dying has made me unwilling to waste time on social conventions or others' expectations. He drew her gently closer. I love you, Clara Porter. Your strength, your compassion, your quiet dignity. I love the way you see the world and the way you've helped me see it more clearly too. And if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you not because it's practical or advantageous, but because loving you makes me happier than I've ever been. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity and depth of his declaration. But what about your ranch, your business aspirations? Wouldn't someone like Evelyn Preston be better positioned to help you achieve them? I didn't build Sunset Ranch to impress bankers or join some social elite, Vincent replied with quiet conviction. I built it to create something meaningful, to prove that a person's worth isn't determined by where they start, but by what they do with the opportunities they're given. His hands tightened gently around hers. You understand that better than anyone I've ever met. Clara's heart felt too full for her chest, emotion threatening to overflow. I love you too, Vincent, she whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating to finally speak aloud. But loving you doesn't change the realities of our situations. I have nothing to bring to this relationship but myself. And that, Vincent said softly, raising one hand to gently cup her cheek, is everything I want. The tenderness in his touch, the certainty in his voice, finally broke through Clara's remaining defenses. As his lips met hers in a gentle kiss, she felt as though something long broken inside her was finally healing, not just from the years of indentured servitude, but from a lifetime of believing herself somehow less worthy, less deserving of happiness than others. When they finally parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. Marry me, Clara. Not immediately, I want to court you properly first, give you time to be certain, but say you'll consider becoming my wife. Clara smiled through her tears, joy bubbling up within her like a spring breaking through parched earth. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll consider it, though I suspect my answer won't change. Vincent's answering smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. He drew her close again, holding her with a gentle reverence that made Clara feel precious beyond words. A sudden knock at the study door startled them apart. Vincent cleared his throat, putting a respectable distance between them before calling, "Come in, Mrs." Hollister entered, her expression carefully neutral though her sharp eyes took in their flushed faces and bright eyes. Pardon the interruption, Mr. Daniels, but you asked to be informed when the Prestons retired for the evening. Thank you, Mrs. Hollister, Vincent replied, his voice admirably steady. And could you please ensure breakfast is served promptly at 7 tomorrow? I believe our guests will be eager to return to Sacramento. Very good, sir, Mrs. Hollister replied, her lips twitching slightly as her gaze moved between him and Clara. Will there be anything else? That will be all for tonight, Vincent assured her. Thank you. After the housekeeper departed, closing the door behind her, Vincent turned back to Clara with a rueful smile. She knows. I think she's known longer than we have, Clara admitted with a soft laugh. Vincent took her hands in his again, his expression turning serious once more. The next few days won't be easy. The Prestons won't take rejection well of either their business proposition or their matrimonial one, and once our intentions become known, there will be talk, perhaps even some business repercussions. Are you sure I'm worth the complications? Clara asked, a last flicker of doubt surfacing. Vincent's answer was immediate and certain. Absolutely sure. The question is whether I'm worth them to you. Being with me will invite scrutiny, possibly unkindness from those who believe in rigid social hierarchies. Clara considered this, then smiled with newfound confidence. After what I've survived, I think I can handle a few disapproving looks. Vincent laughed, the sound warm and genuine. That's my Clara stronger than she knows. The next morning, Clara deliberately avoided the main house until after the Prestons had breakfasted, unwilling to face Evelyn's scrutiny or Mrs. Preston's assessing gaze while her own emotions were still so new and raw. She busied herself with laundry, hanging sheets to dry in the crisp autumn air, watching from a distance as the Prestons' buggy was prepared for their departure. From her vantage point, she could see Vincent standing on the porch, straight-backed despite his still healing injuries, speaking with Mr. Preston. Though she couldn't hear the words, the businessman's stiff posture and quick, dismissive gestures suggested the conversation wasn't going well. Mrs. Preston and Evelyn emerged from the house, the former looking displeased, the latter maintaining a composed expression that nevertheless couldn't quite hide her disappointment. Vincent spoke briefly to each of them, his manner polite but distant. As the Prestons' buggy pulled away, Clara saw Vincent's shoulders relax slightly, as if a weight had been lifted. He turned and looked across the yard, his eyes finding her immediately, as if drawn by some invisible connection. A small, private smile curved his lips before he turned and went back into the house. Later that day, Vincent found Clara in the kitchen garden, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables before the first frost. "They're gone," he said without preamble, sitting carefully on a nearby bench. His ribs were still painful, though improving daily. "I saw them leave," Clara replied, setting down her basket and joining him on the bench. "Did Mr. Preston accept your decision?" Vincent's expression was grim but satisfied. Not gracefully, but he accepted it. "He made some thinly veiled threats about reconsidering the terms of my existing loans, but I reminded him that threatening a client is poor banking practice." And Evelyn, a flicker of sympathy crossed Vincent's face. She was more dignified than her parents. "I believe she genuinely thought we might suit, though more from her mother's influence than any real attachment." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard. "I've been thinking," Vincent said finally, "about what happens next." Clara turned to him, curious. "What do you mean, for us?" he clarified. "If we're to court properly, as I promised, some things will need to change. I can't continue to be your employer while also seeking your hand in marriage. It creates an improper power imbalance." Clara's heart sank. "Are you asking me to leave Sunset Ranch?" "No," Vincent said quickly, taking her hand. "Never that. I'm suggesting we change the nature of your position here." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Mrs. Hollister has been wanting to reduce her duties for some time. She's getting older and running the house is becoming more taxing for her. You want me to take over as housekeeper?" Clara asked, surprised. Vincent shook his head. "Not exactly. I was thinking more of a partnership arrangement, you and Mrs. Hollister working together, with you gradually taking on more responsibility as you learn the full operation of the house. You'd have a salary commensurate with the position, your own authority, and importantly, you wouldn't be directly answerable to me." The idea was startling but not unwelcome. Clara had grown to love Sunset Ranch, and the prospect of having real responsibility, of building something of her own within its boundaries, was appealing. "Do you think Mrs. Hollister would agree?" she asked. Vincent smiled. "It was her suggestion, actually. She approached me this morning after the Prestons left, told me in no uncertain terms that if I was serious about you, I needed to set things right. Those were her exact words." Clara laughed, imagining the forthright housekeeper delivering such advice to her employer. "She's a wise woman." "She is," Vincent agreed, "and she thinks very highly of you, which is not praise she gives lightly." Clara considered the proposal seriously. "It would change things between us, wouldn't it? Not just practically, but how others see us." "That's my hope," Vincent admitted. "I want to court you openly, Clara. No secrets, no shadows. I want everyone to see that my intentions are honorable and my feelings sincere." The simple declaration warmed Clara from within. After years of being overlooked, dismissed, or valued only for her labor, the idea of being publicly acknowledged not just as a woman worthy of love, but as someone with skills and potential beyond servitude was powerfully affirming. "Then I accept," she said, squeezing his hand. "Both the position and the courtship." Vincent's smile was radiant as he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You've made me very happy, Clara Porter." The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Clara's life. As Vincent regained his strength and mobility, they settled into a courtship that balanced propriety with genuine affection. Clara worked closely with Mrs. Hollister, learning the intricacies of running a household the size of Sunset Ranch, gradually taking on more responsibilities, and earning the respect of the other staff through her fairness and competence. Vincent, true to his word, courted her, properly escorting her to church on Sundays, taking her for rides around the ranch property once he was well enough to sit a horse again, bringing her wildflowers or small gifts that showed his thoughtfulness rather than extravagance. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch of the main house, talking for hours as the stars appeared overhead, learning each other's histories, hopes, and dreams. Not everyone approved of their relationship. Some of the townspeople in Sonora whispered when they attended church together, and certain business associates made their disapproval evident in subtle but unmistakable ways. But Vincent remained untroubled by such reactions, and his steadfastness gave Clara the confidence to hold her head high despite the occasional unkind remark or curious stare. By Christmas, Vincent's injuries had fully healed, and Sunset Ranch was thriving despite the Prestons' attempts to create banking difficulties. Other financial institutions, impressed by Vincent's business acumen and the ranch's growing reputation, had been happy to establish relationships that more than compensated for the Preston Bank's coolness. On Christmas Eve, with the ranch house decorated with pine boughs and candles, the entire staff gathered for a celebratory dinner. Vincent, seated at the head of the table with Clara beside him rather than serving as in previous years, stood to address his assembled workers. "This has been a year of challenges," he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the room, but also one of triumph and growth. "Sunset Ranch has prospered because of each of you and your dedication." He raised his glass. "To the best ranch crew in California." Cheers and applause greeted his toast. When the noise subsided, Vincent continued, his expression growing more serious. "I have one more announcement to make." He turned to Clara, taking her hand. "Miss Porter has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. We'll be wed in the spring." A moment of stunned silence was followed by enthusiastic congratulations. Mrs. Hollister looked smugly satisfied, as if a long-term plan had finally come to fruition. Maggie wiped tears of happiness from her eyes, and even Frank, normally stoic, raised his glass in genuine approval. Later that evening, as they stood alone on the porch, watching snowflakes begin to drift from the dark sky, Clara turned to Vincent with wonder in her eyes. "A year ago, I was working from dawn until midnight with no hope beyond survival," she marveled. And now, Vincent prompted gently, drawing her into the circle of his arms. "Now I have everything I never dared to dream of," Clara finished, her voice thick with emotion. "Freedom, purpose, love." Vincent's eyes shone with tenderness as he gazed down at her. "You've given me gifts as well, Clara. You reminded me why I built this ranch in the first place, not just for success, or to prove something to the world, but to create a place where people are valued for their character, where hard work and integrity matter more than background or social position." As his lips met hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership, Clara felt the last shadows of her past finally recede. The girl who had been forced into labor from dawn until midnight was gone, replaced by a woman who had found not just freedom, but a future brighter than she could have imagined. 4 years later, Clara stood on the porch of Sunset Ranch's main house, watching as Vincent rode in from the north pasture, their 2-year-old son Daniel perched securely in front of him on the saddle. Behind them came a small cattle drive, just 50 head being moved to fresh grazing land, but Daniel treated each one as an important adventure with his father. The sound of their son's delighted laughter carried across the yard, bringing a smile to Clara's face. Vincent spotted her waiting and raised his hand in greeting, his face lighting up as it still did whenever he saw her, even after 3 years of marriage. "Mama," Daniel called excitedly as they drew closer. "We moved the cows. I helped, did you now?" Clara replied, descending the porch steps to meet them. "What a big boy you are, helping Papa with the ranch." Vincent dismounted smoothly, then lifted Daniel down into Clara's waiting arms. "He's a natural rancher," Vincent said proudly, leaning in to kiss his wife. "Knows the names of all the cowboys already. And the horses," Daniel added importantly. "Thunder is Papa's horse. He's the fastest." "Indeed he is," Clara agreed, adjusting her hold on their son as she felt the baby within her shift and kick. At 6 months pregnant with their second child, she was beginning to find Daniel's weight challenging, though she'd never admit it. Vincent noticed anyway, gently taking Daniel from her arms. "Let's go see if Mrs. Hollister has any cookies for hungry cowboys, shall we?" As they entered the house together, Clara marveled at how completely her life had transformed. Sunset Ranch had grown and prospered under Vincent's leadership, now employing over 50 workers and known throughout California for its quality stock. The main house had been expanded, and Clara ran it with a skill and confidence that had earned her respect throughout the community. More importantly, she and Vincent had built a partnership that strengthened with each passing year equal in all the ways that mattered, complementing each other's strengths, facing challenges together. Their marriage had even helped change attitudes in Sonora and beyond, as people who had initially disapproved came to see the genuine love and mutual respect between them. That evening, after Daniel had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Clara and Vincent sat together on the porch swing that had been his gift to her on their first anniversary. The spring air was soft with promise, the stars brilliant overhead. "I received a letter today," Vincent said, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "From Nathan Preston." Clara raised her eyebrows in surprise. After all this time, what did he want? Vincent's mouth quirked in amusement. "To propose a business partnership, believe it or not. It seems our success has become impossible to ignore, even for the Prestons." "And what did you tell him?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. "That Sunset Ranch is doing quite well with its existing partnerships, thank you very much." Vincent's hand moved to rest gently on her rounded belly. "And that my most important partnership isn't business-related at all." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to the mining company that day? If you hadn't seen me?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I believe some things are meant to be, Clara. If not that day, perhaps another. But I'm grateful it was that day, because every moment since has been a gift." As his lips met hers in a tender kiss, Clara silently echoed his gratitude. From forced labor to freedom, from isolation to love, from despair to joy, her journey had led her to this moment. This man, this life that once would have seemed an impossible dream. Under the vast canopy of stars, surrounded by the ranch they had built together, Clara and Vincent held each other close, their love a testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and the simple act of recognizing another's worth beyond the circumstances of their birth or station. For Clara, who had once counted the hours from dawn until midnight in dread, time now flowed differently, measured not in tasks completed or obligations fulfilled, but in moments of joy shared, in children's laughter, in quiet evenings with the man who had first bought her contract, then given her freedom, and finally offered his heart. And that, she knew with bone-deep certainty, was the greatest freedom of all.